Well, another episode of Assess and Caress on Jay Leno's Garage. We have two cars from the Audrey Museum here today, and they're brought to us thanks to reliable carriers. They transport them across the country for us. One car came a mere 15 feet. It was over there, and we pushed it over here. This is mine. I have no idea what Donald is thinking here. You know, Donald's or the prima Donald, as we call him, is our appraiser extraordinaire. That's what his job, his living is traveling around the country and appraising valuable cars for people, even cars not so valuable. And when they find out the valuable car is not worth anything, well, Donald then gets fired. But the man always tells the truth. What's the theme here? I'm puzzled. We have a Bentley, we have a Citroën, and we have a Chrysler. What is the theme?
The theme here, Jay, is try a different view.
All right, I still have no idea what that means.
You'll see how it all ties in.
All right.
We've got a 1922 Bentley 3-liter, a 1961 Chrysler 300G, and a 1963 Citroën DS19 Concorde.
I still don't see what they have in common, but go ahead.
You will very shortly.
All right, I hope so. We don't have that much time.
Let's start with the Bentley.
Well, fabulous car.
This, of course, is the first model that Bentley built. WO started the company in 1919, introduced the 3-liter in 1920. This is a 1922 model, so an early car. This is, although many people think of vintage Bentleys, they think of the 6 blower. This is actually the car that first established Bentley's reputation. It won Le Mans twice, this model. And it is also one of those things, like we often talk about cars like the XK120, that just seem decades ahead of their time. You drive this car and you are not in 1922. You
know who bought the very first one? Desmond Llewellyn, who played Q on James Bond. He was a small boy. His father took him by the hand. He wanted to go to the Olympia Motor Show. And in 1919, they had this on display. And his father bought it right off the floor. And when I had him on The Tonight Show, that's what we talked about. But yeah, but Q from... I never joke Bond. Yeah,
and of course, there's also the great Bond connection with Bentleys, because of course in the Ian Fleming novels, James Bond drove a 4.5-liter Bentley, and not an Aston Martin as he did in the movie.
Do you know who Fleming wanted to play the first James Bond?
Who?
Hoagie Carmichael.
Hoagie Carmichael.
Well, he thought that was a good thing for a spy kind of guy.
Yeah, I know that he did not like the choice of Sean Connery because he thought he was far too lower class to play James Bond.
Right.
But,
well, that was the genius of it. You take a thug and you put him in a Savile Row suit, and you have that sort of toxic masculinity, which is of course not really
the core of James Bond.
Of course, yeah, exactly.
But you know, getting back to this car, it's an amazing thing when you think about the technical ability of this car on the road. And this particular model, which was sold new to an Australian who was living in London at the time. And of course, Bentley sold you the chassis and the engine. And he ordered this body from Park Ward. This is the original body of the car. And while he was waiting for the body to be built, he thought he'd try his Bentley out. So he drove the chassis with a chair on it around London a bit, which must have been quite...
Well, I drive my Duesenberg chassis around LA all the time with just a box on it. And that...
Well, there you go. You know, eccentrics live even in today's age.
Well, the great thing about Bentley was he was a locomotive engineer. This is almost the opposite of a Bugatti, because Bugatti used to say Bentley built the fastest trucks or the fastest lorries in Europe. You know, it's sort of an left-handed compliment. But the reason they won Le Mans is because they were bulletproof. There was no cylinder head on this. Well, to do a valve job, it's like going to a proctologist for dental work, basically. You've got to come up through the bottom to get. You had to literally take the crank and everything to get up into the valve, but you didn't get any blown head gaskets. That's why they were able to. That's why Bentley hated supercharging or turbocharging. He just thought, just build a bigger engine. A big engine moving slowly is more efficient. I know it's more efficient, but certainly more reliable than a small engine spinning quickly. You know, that was his theory.
And that's one of the key reasons why Bentleys were so incredibly popular in Australia, because the conditions were very rough. They needed cars that were very dependable. And one of the reasons why, obviously, this Australian in London bought his Bentley, took it back home to Australia, where it had a number of Australian owners, I think 4 Australian owners, before it was finally sold into the Audrey collections last year. And it's an amazing car because it is so incredibly versatile. This car was also featured at a concours in Switzerland called the Ice, which is a Concorde held on the ice in St. Moritz.
Right.
And so this car was brought there, fitted with studs on the tires, and climbed alpine passes without a problem. You know, it's amazing to think of how you can use a car this old in today's traffic.
Right.
And this is astonishing. This car also was fitted, when it was brand new, it didn't have front axle brakes.
I was going to say, yeah, now
But
it
that
does.
was fitted when the car was 3 years old. When the factory finally introduced them, the owner had them upgraded. And one of the great things, too, about this car is that it comes with a great deal of wonderful paperwork, including the original warranty from 1922 to 1925 of the Bentley company. And you can imagine bringing your car back for warranty work when you lived in Australia.
Well, you know, it's funny, when you go back to the early cars, like Piersau, they were guaranteed for life, because they really thought, well, you'll have this your whole life, it'll never break. You didn't drive that many miles, you know, it's a little unusual. But yeah, I'm surprised they weren't more popular in America, because it really is an American in the sense that it can go great distances under harsh conditions, you know.
That's an excellent point, and probably would have helped the Bentley company, which was chronically underfunded and short of cash. If they had probably broken into the American market, it probably would have done them quite well.
Right, right.
Let's take a look at the engine, because I know that this is certainly the heart and soul of the Bentley.
And the engine looks to be original and unrestored. Sure, it's probably been opened up and cleaned up, but it looks like it's been put back together exactly as it was. You know, bronze castings here. And, you know, it's so funny, the 3-liter is so beloved because when the more powerful versions came out, people say, oh, I'm missing the bloody thump, you know, the thump, thump, thump of the 4. They went 3-liter, 4.5, 6.5, and then finally 8-liter. And Bentley never built a supercharged car. Those were built by Tim Birkin. He, from Dorothy Paget, he dated this rather wealthy woman for her money. And he used all her money to go racing, and he converted. But just as Bentley predicted, I'm not sure if any supercharged car even finished a race, because they just overstressed the motor, yeah.
But yet that is the vintage Bentley that captures everybody's imagination.
Right.
It's a Van den Plas Tourer supercharged Bentley. And this, to me, and to a lot of people, to you I'm sure as well, represents what true early Bentley motoring is all about.
Yeah, just a great car. They're getting it right the first time. At 3-liter, which was actually quite large, because most European stuff was 1.5 liters, 1.5, 1.3, 1.8, anything over 2.7. Oh my God, that was like a big block, you know.
Exactly.
So this was a big motor for Europe. It might be why it didn't sell that well on the continent.
Well, yeah, where they taxed by displacement.
Right.
And this is a genuine 90-mile-per-hour car from
Right.
the factory.
Right.
Which is also an amazing thing to think about, a 90-mile-per-hour car in 1922 with rear-wheel brakes. So, you know, you do the math.
Well, you know, it's funny because cars have always been fast. The real progress is stopping and going around corners. Even you go back to 1910, people were getting up to 60, 70, 80 miles an hour, you know, and they come to a corner and, oh, we hadn't thought this through, you know.
Or we've got time, or there's space.
Right.
So speaking of space,
Yes.
let's take a look at the Citroën. Now, I know that you, like I, are a Citroëniste, and these are some of my favorite Citroëns. I mean, the whole idea of, you know, thinking about looking into the future.
Right.
In 1955, when they introduced the DS, it must have been literally at the Paris Auto Show as if something had dropped from space.
Well, the funny thing is, Citroëns have always been used to portray the future. You know, whether you saw aliens in a vehicle in the year 2525, a Citroën will go by in the background, you know, with the suspension down, and you know, because it does look like the future, and it was.
It was a vision that was so incredibly particular. The DS sedan was designed by Flaminio Bertoni, an Italian working in France, and the design was so incredibly forward-looking. But it was interesting, people wondered if they could do the variants as they had on the Traction Avant, where they had coupe models and they had a convertible model. And the factory really didn't want to get involved in that. And so one of my favorite French coach builders, Henri Chaperon, stepped into the breach. And he made a number of custom-bodied convertibles. And the Citroën factory saw that, wow, these are really terrific and it'd be a great addition to the line.
Right.
So they actually engaged him to produce convertibles for the factory.
It's funny because it was a fabulous design, unique suspension, a fiberglass roof, a bunch of things, but they ran out of money when they got to the motor. This was supposed to have a flat 6 like a Porsche in the front. But the money ran out, so they just went back to the same old, what's it, 1.8 liter, 2 liter, whatever it was. Yeah, not much horsepower, kind of slow.
Slightly agricultural.
Yeah, slightly agricultural. Manual gearbox, traditional. But everything else about it was very advanced, yeah.
And, you know, I love coach-built cars.
Right.
And I think that once Henri Chaperon, and let's talk about Chaperon for a moment. He started his business in 1919
Right.
and did custom bodies for all of the great French Grand Routiers, Delage, Delahaye, etc. And after the war, of course, those marks were in great decline.
Right.
And so he had to look someplace else for coach building, hence the idea of doing the DS convertibles. But he also continued to do custom-bodied cars in very small runs, coupes, some four-door cars, and this is one of them. And this model is called the Concorde. It was, I think, a really interesting take on the Citroën
It
theme.
is, because when you realize the original DS had a kind of more of a fastback roof, this is kind of like, it's kind of like seeing Donald in a toupee. Hey, wait a minute, something's off here. It doesn't, it's just kind of, you know, it's one, it looks like it's just stuck on the top, but then you realize the practicality of, you have really decent headroom in the back, easy to get in and out of. And so its functionality makes it, the more I look at it, the more I like it, just because it's so different from a DS or even an SM or any car like that. Because these cars are so aerodynamic, but there's no aerodynamic advantage to this. This is obviously just to carry people.
Absolutely not. This is about style. It's about
Right.
unique style. And also one of the things that Chaperon was noted for was a certain simplicity in style. Yes, it had decoration because after all, this is French coach building.
Right.
But it was not outrageous, not flamboyant. Chaperon, Kellner, Binder were sort of the quiet coach builders in Paris. And what is really interesting is that this is not simply a long two-door roof plopped onto a DS.
Right.
The reshaping of the rear fenders
Right.
is really thought to integrate the design of the car in a way that is clearly very, very thoughtful. And they're very successful with their factory cars and with these small runs of cars in various bodies. They had the coupes Le Dandy and all sorts of things like that, usually named after racetracks and things like that. And this also, quite interestingly, features the Citromatic transmission.
Right, their
This is one
version
of the
of an
first of
automatic.
the automatic transmission Citroëns.
Well, it's a semi-automatic. right?
Semi-automatic,
Yeah, right.
exactly.
I mean, the thing I like about French cars is, you know, every other car is built in the industrial city, Stuttgart, Detroit, whereas this is built in Paris. It's actually in the city of Paris, so there's a sort of lightness about it. You know, it's the city of light. You know, I mean, you get that feeling from it. You don't get this sort of gritty Detroit V8, Stuttgart, you know, precision. It's something sort of la-di-da about it. You know, yeah, I find them fascinating. They do everything opposite. You know, every other. And it's funny because they're surrounded by Germany and everybody else does 6mm, 8mm, 10mm. French do 5mm, 7mm, 9mm. I mean, they're just that. For example,
all about vive la différence.
And a French dial on the dashboard, you pull the light switch out to turn the light off. You push it against it. So people get in French cars, push all the buttons, they walk away, all the headlights, what, oh, you got to go back. I mean, it just makes me laugh.
Well, the idea of design and function also is very, very paramount, even in this custom-bodied Citroën. That wonderful single-spoke wheel, which is absolutely terrific for safety.
Right.
Very early safety advance. And I love all of the controls for the ventilation, for instance. It's all very sort of Art Deco with arrows in red and blue and just very, very graphic, very visual.
And nobody makes comfort like the French. Even Rolls-Royce could not match the comfort of French cars. Probably because their roads are so smooth. So they have that pneumatic suspension with the, they literally float down the road. I always say to people, sit in a Citroën, tell me it's not the most comfortable car. They're like, okay. Whoa, and people are really impressed. Boy, I didn't think it'd be this comfortable.
No, it's absolutely extraordinary. The combination of the suspension, the seats, really makes it quite wonderful. And also quite interestingly, you know, today when people are talking about the conversion of classics to electric.
Right.
And I have a very strong feeling about that because for so many cars, the engine is so much a part of what the car is, the smell, the sound. the vibration. Here, I think, because of what we were talking about before about the engine in a DS, this I think would be a perfect candidate for an electric conversion because it would actually match in terms of the power plant what the suspension delivers.
Yeah, I hate to see a classic get ruined, especially it's worth more in its original form than it ever will be as a conversion.
I'm a nice guy, but I'm
Yeah.
saying that if you were going to convert
Right.
a classic to electric, I think that this would be a
Right.
car that an electric conversion would not affect negatively its character
Right.
as a car. Let's take a look at the engine.
All right.
Since we've been talking about it so much, we have to do that release on the other side as well.
Okay.
And on the
yeah,
other side,
so
we
we
do
got
that
one here as
inside.
well.
Because, of course, the French have to do everything differently.
Right.
Can't have one release for the hood because, God forbid,
No one has improved on the stick. The stick has been a mainstay. Okay, just typical Citroën engine. So it's under 2 liters, and this is probably what, 90 horse?
about that.
Yeah, something like that. Interesting the way the spare tire is mounted here.
The other interesting thing, of course, about this is that in terms of the packaging, it is a front mid-engined placement,
Right,
which is quite interesting because we see this later as well in the Citroën SM,
right.
and it gives a certain kind of a balance to the car that you don't normally expect, especially in a family sedan. One of the things that's also so interesting about this is the fact that in the 1960s, they were also experimenting with a Wankel version of this because the Wankel engine would have fit quite
Right.
well here and as an update, but they never got around to that. It's very interesting because while coach building was dying every place around the world, Chaparral actually managed to maintain its business through the 1970s. He passed away in 1978. His widow took the company over and continued to produce cars. They made a wonderful series of, well, wonderful or horrifying, depending on your opinion, a series of specials based on the SM
Right.
as well, including a presidential limousine.
Yeah, that was
based on the
interesting.
SM,
Yeah.
and a couple of convertible models and a four-door called the Opera, which is
Yeah.
an amazing thing. And the last one they made was actually based on the CX in 1981.
Oh,
It was
okay.
the last thing
yeah.
that Chaparral did. So the company lasted a long time after a lot of its contemporaries were long gone.
Did Robert Opern ever work for them? No, he would.
Robert Opron worked for the company, for Citroën, didn't work for,
Right, Citroën. Right,
yes,
right,
he
yeah.
designed the cars for Citroën for the factory. But it's a marvelous thing, and again, an example of looking at a Citroën is already a different choice,
Right.
but looking at a custom-bodied Citroën is an even further choice.
And the sad thing is, they just really didn't care about the American market. If you wanted to be a Citroën dealer, all you had to do was say, yeah, okay. So consequently, you would find a Shell gas station. Oh, and I sell Citroëns. They didn't have the parts backup. They didn't have the service. They were never very popular, and they were popular with American enthusiasts. But I think people just got frustrated because the dealers were few and far between. And even to this day, there's still a few specialist Citroën guys that are great, but there was never any real factory support.
It's interesting that Citroën actually had its best sales years in the US in the early 1960s, and they were on the verge of really building something, but to your point, none of the European manufacturers really
No.
understood what service meant thousands of miles away from the factory. They had no idea.
My dad was 20 years older than his youngest brother, who was my Uncle Tony, who was an artist, and he bought a Renault Dauphine,
Dauphine, yes.
Dauphine, yeah, where they had the country horn, beep, beep, and the city horn, beep, beep. And he brought it to my father. And my father, what kind of car is this for a man to drive? It's not a man's car. It's got a stupid little horn. And my father just couldn't understand why. He liked this little French car. It just made me laugh. Hilarious.
Well, we'll look at something which is the very polar opposite of a Renault Dauphine,
Ah.
a Chrysler 300G. So now we have a car with which you are very familiar
Yes.
since it comes from 15 feet away,
Right.
where we're standing right now. And this is a car that also really speaks to me. This is a 1961 Chrysler 300G. And it speaks to me for a number of reasons. One, because again, I love design.
Right.
And in the shameless plug department, in my book, Stile Transatlantico, Transatlantic Style, A Romance of Fins and Chrome.
Yeah, terrific.
The Virgil Exner's forward look was very well featured because it was such an incredible inspiration to the Italians after World War II. And this is the last of the forward-look cars from
Right,
Chrysler.
with the fin.
1962,
Yeah.
the fins were gone.
Yeah, it didn't work.
But it was an amazing thing, and these cars actually had some work done on them by Giovanni Savanuzzi, the great Italian designer and aerodynamicist. So the fins actually have a aerodynamic purpose. And you have to remember that this is a car which most people watching this will probably not realize or even believe, that set a speed record of 143 miles per hour.
These are wonderful cars. This is what a supercar was before they moved to the GM mid-size car. You take the big engine. They are a big car, big engine, small car, small engine. GM had an edict that you could not put a big engine in a smaller car. That'd be irresponsible. And then John DeLorean came along, and with the Copo deal, the purchase order, all that kind of stuff, you were able to do it. This is a really fast car. The 413 replaced the Hemi in late 58 was last year, the Hemi, and it's got the cross ram induction system on it. It's got bucket seats. It's got the swivel seats, which are pretty neat.
Now, that's the thing I was going to say, because this is very much the Donald Osborne style executive car with this marvelous.
Anyway, yeah, and you slide right in. Yeah, very good.
It is absolutely phenomenal. And in my well-stated status as coupe sedan GT guy, this is a car that has it all. It's got style, it's got performance, and I think people that have never driven this car would be shocked at how well it handles.
It's got radials on it now, and with this torsion bar suspension, it really handles. It's great fun to drive. This thing is really very, very fast. Yeah, I love driving this thing. You got on a fast 2-lane road. It's really good. I mean, the brakes, I guess you could convert it to disc all the way around to be on the safe side, which I did on my Imperial, because that's really heavy. But it's 4 individual bucket seats. This actually carried over to the Charger in 66 and 67. It's got a Wurlitzer-style dashboard. It's not backlit. It's neon.
It's amazing.
It's neon. You turn it on, and the whole
Astrodome.
Oh, yeah, it's really fantastic. The tack is in the transmission tunnel. Hey, what's my RPM? You're always doing that. So, but no, it is. Well, let's open the hood and show them what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
Yep, there you go.
This is the look of performance. I mean,
2 4-barrel carburetors. It's a lot of fun unless you want to change the spark plugs. They have the short ram and the long ram. You got 400 horse. This is 375 in 1961. And this might look like a big, heavy car. It's really not. It might be just 4,000 pounds, maybe just about that. But you'd think it'd be 4,800 or something like that. Well, there's no safety features. None of those foolish safety features in this thing. But it's got air conditioning. This was called the banker's hot rod, is what it was. This is what people raced before the Chevelles and the mid-sized cars, Even the old Beach Boys song, there's a 413, so that sounds real mean, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's just a wonderful driving car. Reliable, easy, and still pretty reasonably priced.
And again, the idea of balance. People don't think of cars of this period, American cars of this period, having real good handling balance. But look again at where the engine is placed.
Right.
Here's the central line of the front wheels.
Right.
Here's the engine.
Yeah.
So that really helps the handling of this car in a way that you would not necessarily imagine. Also, just to get back to the interior for a second, those 4 bucket seats.
Yeah.
Again, this whole idea of sort of the dream car for the road, that was first seen in the Chrysler Norseman concept car in the 1950s.
Right.
And just this idea of excess, because you have a car this big, but you have 4 individual seats.
Right, and everybody has a cigarette lighter. you have windows up, and people have 2 cigarettes per person smoking. It's just the stupidest thing.
And again, for me as a kid, the idea of the ultimate in luxury, this is a 2-door hardtop, so all the windows go down. You've got front windows, so you have plenty of ventilation. But this car is air conditioning.
Yeah, that's right.
And
it's funny because when you think of American cars really ruled the road at this period. When you bought a Mercedes in those days, you got a 6-cylinder with an aftermarket air conditioner, it would kind of roar and make noise. It was it wasn't integrated. And, you know, for all American manufacturers' faults, the one thing they always got was heating and air conditioning. I mean, just to a fault. It'll be 150 degrees, you're freezing to death, I think. And the Europeans never quite caught on to that. So this against the Mercedes, you wouldn't even think twice. Why would you get a 6-cylinder with a carburetor? You can
Think of it, Jay. I mean, we are the land of central heating and bathrooms.
Right.
And so, you know, it was one of those things that, you know, how could we possibly lift a window without pushing a button? We need to push a button to get the window up. Rolling up windows? What, are you crazy?
Exactly.
So, Jay, of the 3 cars we have here today, our 1922 Bentley 3-liter, this 1961 Chrysler 300G, or our 1963 Citroën DS19 Concorde, which do you think has appreciated the most in percentage value in the last 5 years?
In the last 5 years, well, you know, when I got this car probably 10 years ago, I think I paid $56,000 for it, something like that. They've gone up, not hugely substantially, but if it went to 80 or 90, that's certainly a big jump percentage-wise. Well, this one is hard to put a value on because this came from the Mullen collection. Now, Peter Mullen was a perfectionist. This was restored in one of the great restoration houses in Switzerland where, I mean, every detail is perfect. So I think you'd probably pay twice what the car was worth and still not get what the restoration value was. This was probably $300,000 to restore this thing, I would think, easily. So it's hard to put a value on it. Bentleys have come down in the last couple of years. So they went nuts in the 80s, 90s, 2000s. They sort of settled down a little bit. So, but that one has such great provenance, so it's worth a lot of, boy, this is hard to say. All right.
I love to challenge him.
Well, it's the last 5 year part that kills you. Okay. I would say the Bentley third, only because I remember they were 700,000-800,000, and then they're 4.5. So I'm third. I put this maybe as number 1 because they were so cheap 5 or 6 years ago, and now they're kind of getting appreciated. So I would go 1, 2, 3. All right, try that.
All right. You seem to have such conviction.
Well, I just find it annoying. This 5-year thing is so stupid to me. Because on the last 5 years, okay, what was I doing in 19? Okay, all right, well, go ahead. Go ahead with your nonsense.
Okay, so 5 years ago, that Bentley would have been $200,000. Today, about $285,000.
Really, only $200,000 5 years ago? I
Sure.
would have bought it for that 5 years ago.
Well,
I never was seeing one that cheaply. They always seem to be in the high 3s to low 4s, but okay.
Not for a 3-liter.
So that's third.
Perhaps.
Okay.
Our Citroën, 5 years ago, that car probably would have been about $150,000, and today it's about $195,000.
Okay.
So again, the interest in Citroëns is growing thanks to a higher profile, especially for the custom-bodied cars, which don't necessarily appeal to the traditional Citroeniste.
I would be real surprised if you could buy this for $195,000. You think you could?
You could.
All right. Okay.
Absolutely.
And how about our friend here?
Our friend, the Chrysler 300G. 5 years ago, this car would have brought about $90,000. Today, $135,000. Because as people began to look at 1950s and early 1960s American cars, a lot of the GM and Ford cars that led the market for a very long time have lost favor. But people overlooked these, as you mentioned, for a very long time, and anyone who has experience behind the wheel of one realizes what these are and how special they are.
Also, the fact that for years, even years after, cars kind of look like this, not as wildly styled, more conservative, kind of look. Then in the last 5 or 6 years, everything got SUV-ish and station wagon type and high roof, and suddenly this looks like nothing else on the road. When I drive this, people go like this because it just doesn't look like anything else on the road. So that would attest to it too. So what is the winner? What is the number 1?
The winner, shockingly enough,
yeah,
is the car that was chosen by you, the Chrysler.
Oh, okay, there you go. Well, all right, I'll take that. All right.
See,
I guess it's okay.
You've taken a different view.
Since I won, I will accept that.